Greetings, everyone. Your cartoonist pal Stan here with some very funny people in the green room right now. Yes, we're here for another episode of 50 Years in the Dungeon, the show that I'm doing to celebrate the fact that this year is the 50th anniversary of the game Dungeons and Dragons and the hobby of tabletop role playing. All wrapped up. 50 years. And we're having a different episode than usual. Usually, I've got someone on, one or two people on that I have a conversation with while I'm drawing a cartoon homage to a classic piece of D&D art. But on one of my recent shows, it was brought to my attention that we did the year 1999, which was two episodes ago. I did a drawing from a product from 1999. Was the year of the 25th anniversary of D&D. We had a 25th anniversary tour, which makes it the halfway point for what we're covering in the shows. And I thought, you know what? Halfway, good time to just kind of stop and look at the first half. Just look at the first half of D&D. We're celebrating the 50 years, but while we're here, let's consider those 25 years that we've just finished covering. And to do that, I've asked back a couple of fine fellows who've been guests on the show already. I've worked with both of them at TSR. I worked with both of them at Wizards of the Coast, and I've been friends with and worked with them outside of that too. Turns out, we all three worked at West End Games, so I never worked with Bill while he was on staff there. There we go. Bill's one of them. Bill Slavicsek and Ed Stark. You should definitely go back and watch the episodes that they've been on previously because they had a lot of interesting things to say. But we're going to have more interesting things to say tonight. And so, without any further ado, I'm going to bring up Bill Slavicsek and Ed Stark. Thank you for joining me again, guys.
Of course.
Um, how are things going since your last? Have you been overrun with fans on the internet since your last appearance here?
I've
Yeah, I
had to
thought
move.
so. All right, never mind.
I wouldn't say overrun, but
Well, I mean, you guys already had a deservedly fair share of fans already. Just trying to, grab some little bit of fame for myself off your coattails.
Hmm.
Yeah, so we are here tonight to talk about the first half of of the D&D experience, the first 25 years. Like I said before, we all three were there at that juncture in '99. We were in Lake Geneva when it got bought and moved out to Seattle, and so I think we've got certainly an on the ground perspective of what things were like at that juncture. Um,
it was a turning point. It was, what do we do next now that we're still TSR, but now we're also Wizards of the Coast, and it was a lot of ideas going around, a lot of churning on what was D&D going to be moving forward, and the company in general.
right.
We were definitely at a interesting point in the roller coaster that was D&D. When I joined TSR, one of my big thoughts had been, "Oh, great! I'm now at the top, the high point of the industry, just in time for us to have like basically 1 year of what I would think of as normalcy, and then, but then we had a big climb. I mean, really, by the end of second edition, D&D products were selling about what we maybe hoped to get at a West End product, but that was still not nearly enough. And then, obviously, third edition things went insane. You know,
Well, I mean, certainly that's a thing to bring up. The idea of why, and that happens every time an edition is announced. Then the sales for the remaining products
well,
before.
before it was announced. I mean, one of the reasons we had to do third edition in a lot of ways was sort of revitalize things. You know, there were a lot
So
of
one of
reasons.
my first tasks when Peter made me director of the TSR group and R&D, was to analyze where we were and what wasn't working. And the fact of the matter was we had too many we were competing with ourselves.
Right.
We had way too many campaign settings. We had too many products that only sold to 1/4 to 1/6 of the game group. And the edition was already 10 years old. And that's about the point when we have sold to everybody who wants to get it at the time, right? So those were the first beginnings of challenges that I was facing from a point of taking over the business, right? What is it and what do I do with it?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
Mhm.
Go ahead, Ted.
I was just going to say, yeah, it was interesting because we had, people who were incredible fans of D&D, but in a lot of ways, most of them were fans of a particular game setting. And, as Bill said, it divided everything up massively, and even D&D product, it was hard to sell a core D&D product in some ways. And then there would always be fights if you put out anything that wasn't set in a particular campaign universe. There was always kind of like fights about, well, where does it belong? And, all the special rules you have to put in the introduction just to get it to fit, crazy.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it's been no secret in the 25 years that had followed the launch of third edition that all of the research that we have done has been talked about, and we came to that conclusion. The business team came to similar conclusions, and we piled that together. But that we had fragmented that audience, and as you were just saying, Ted, one of the weird things to me looking at it was that even core D&D should have been the thing that everyone bought, but even that wasn't. It was its own special line,
Mm-hmm.
and that was
Yeah,
problematic.
it's kind of funny because it comes back to something I was thinking about the first 25 years. I played D&D. Well, okay, backing up. I started playing D&D back just a few years after it came out. Not immediately, but weirdly enough, not living in the Midwest, I actually got products about the time, you know, uh, that they came out in the Northeast. So it felt like I was playing from the beginning because I started with the little books, and for me, getting the player's handbook and the DMG and everything was a slower process because they just weren't available where I was until a little later. But I had thought about it, and in a lot of ways, as I grew up, I got older, became a teenager, and then a college student, and everything. Second edition for me was almost like an opt out moment. It wasn't that there was anything wrong with second edition. I mean, they did a lot of nice work with it, but for me, I'd already started playing a lot of other games, and so I thought, I don't need to pick up this new edition of D&D. I'm happy with first edition if I want to come back and play D&D, but I'm playing all these other games now. And it was on my mind as we were working on third edition, what can we do to keep that from being an opt-out moment for people? So, that was
All right, yeah,
Well, I
let's.
something I
have
had.
a different version of that, right? Because I was a professional by the time they announced second edition. I was already working at West End Games. Actually, the articles in Dragon leading up to second edition actually got me excited about, oh, they're doing this to the rules, they're trying something new. And then, of course, between professional curiosity, and I still had a gaming group. I was still living in New York at the time, so I still had my gaming group that wanted to play D&D every week. And of course, they wanted to try second edition. So we picked it up, and of course, we had just released the Star Wars game a couple of years earlier and had gone with color plates. And I was at Gen Con with Curtis Smith, and we went to talk to Jim Ward, and he kind of yelled at us and said, "It's because of you that I got to put color plates in my new edition." So
It's
you get
it's
color because of West End games. There you go.
It's interesting because I, like you, Ed, I I did not play second edition when it came out, and it was because I was playing a lot of other games. But our friend Bill Omsdahl was running second edition in the group that I was with, and I
Mhm.
opted out on that evening that they were gaming. I just wasn't gaming that night, so it it wasn't really a choice. But when I came back to play again, by the time I came back to play again, second edition was D&D. So that was what, if you wanted to play. And
Yeah, and I would play it if somebody was running it. I played in Bill's game and a few of the other people, uh, but yeah, it was just it didn't take me over. I never felt like I was. I read the same articles that Bill did. I was a Dragon magazine subscriber from, oh good God, way back. Uh, but I just felt, when we were working on third edition and getting ready to work on it, I felt like there needed to be more of a really audience participation enabling of it. Um,
so Michael in chat says, other than Star Wars, what else was going on in the RPG landscape at the second edition turnover? So around late
Shadowrun,
88.
Vampire.
Stan played in my 7 year long Middle Earth role playing campaign, which used Iron Crown's rules.
Yeah, there
Played a
was
lot of champions.
certainly Champions was doing very well. I was playing Villains and Vigilantes, but Champions was doing quite
Me
well.
too.
Um, there were a bunch.
Twilight
I mean,
2000.
hmm?
Twilight 2000.
Twilight
One of
2000.
the things, one of the things I think about of that era, which really appealed to me at that age level, too, was a lot of things had very systemic approaches. A lot of games, like Champions, like MERP, like GURPS, a lot of them were we're depending on having this cool system, this cool simulation. Bill brings up an interesting thing about Vampire, which went the other way. I was teeing that one up for him.
Well, I think Vampires are the year after
Yeah,
1990.
Vampire was a little bit later on,
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I think Shadowrun was before or right around the time of.
right around that time. Space 1889 was right around that
Yeah,
time.
I'm
Fantasy
thinking,
Games Unlimited had a whole bunch of box set games that
oh,
were
yeah.
out about that time. I mean, the
Well, I
interesting
was just
thing to me
thinking,
about that era, and then I will let my guests talk, is that it was a time kind similar to today where there was the big company and a couple of other close contenders, and then a lot of mid-level companies that did their own thing. But unlike today, the number of gamers overall was smaller, but the people who were in the hobby were much more experimental as a general rule, and lots of
and
people,
every game had a different game system,
yeah.
unlike today where you have a
yeah.
lot of D20 games. Right.
And I was thinking a lot during the 80s and early 90s. Um, in a lot of ways, systems ruled the roost. It was all about the either like you were a simulation like Twilight 2000, or you were a number crunching thing like Champions or whatever. Uh, and then on the other side, we started to grow into a more mood thing. Bill brought up Shadowrun, Vampire, Star Wars to some extent. Really bridged the gap there because there were places again where the game came back more about the setting. I think in a way that's what fueled TSR in a lot of ways in second edition to just start cranking out settings. Because you remember in first edition D&D, what was there? There was Mystara was like the basic setting, and there was Forgotten Realms kind of toward the end of first edition, and of course Greyhawk was there. I'm not saying there weren't any other systems, but those were the campaign settings that TSR kind of supported, right? First edition.
Well, yeah, and there's an interesting growth as the hobby began to mature. In 1983, we see the release of Ravenloft and the beginning of real stories in your adventures.
Mhm.
And, and I think that kind of began the cycle of adventures becoming a little more complicated, becoming a little more story oriented. The settings began to develop around that in that era as well. I mean, we always had Greyhawk, but they were kind of just
Yeah,
background.
the
Well,
yeah,
but
the interesting thing for me about Greyhawk was, un, it was it was a de facto setting.
Mhm.
There weren't products produced to show the world of Greyhawk. There were things
There
that
was a
were
big
set.
map folio. I had the big map
right,
folio.
but there were not a lot of details. When
That's
Forgotten
not.
Realms came out, it dropped like a I'm trying not to say this negatively because it's not, but it was like you sit there and you had the Greyhawk map folio with the little couple of paragraphs, and then bam, here's a campaign setting. It's like really that was the first time
Yeah,
TSR did a really big major campaign setting. There had been things like that, like Empire of the Petal Throne and some other things, but those were all very considered almost kind of niche, you know.
I think that Bill, you're right that Ravenloft is a big turning point in that narrative became as important as, or could be as important as, an interesting map and set of keys for you to go through. It's not just the place, not just adventuring in place, but adventuring in story.
Yes.
And
Well,
And
most
as you were
amazing
saying,
what they accomplished with 32 pages.
yeah,
Dragonlance was
so
very narrative driven. Michael says in chat,
and
but it was different than Forgotten Realms, as Ed was saying.
well,
Right, but Dragonlance was later.
I was going to mention
Dragonlance
also
was
that
before Forgotten Realms.
Was it?
Yes.
anyway, Dragonlance and Ravenloft, though,
Mhm.
remember they were released as adventures, whereas Forgotten Realms was actually a campaign setting.
Yeah, but Dragonlance is a weird thing because it was a storyline that synced
Yeah,
with what became. They were adventures, but they were telling a story through the
That
adventure.
was in the novels. Yeah.
yeah, but
Mm-hmm.
the
But
campaign
you were
setting,
going through.
as we know it, came out after the novels, after the adventures. Um, I just find that interesting because I still think of Forgotten Realms as like the first D&D campaign setting that was released to be a campaign setting. I mean, yes, Greyhawk was there. Again, keeping in mind, I'm talking about my perspective
Right.
as
Yeah,
a,
yeah,
as
yeah.
a consumer player. Everything, it's like
Well,
holy.
But
and
the
there's
interesting,
growth, right? The industry, they learned things. They tried something new. They learned
yeah,
another thing. They got
But
production
then,
got better, right? So they could now do a big box set, right? So
but then
all of that
TSR
is
was like, let's just keep doing that.
I mean, the
One a
interesting thing
year,
about
bam.
about Realms, sorry, stumbled on that in my brain for a second, was that it had been through Dragon Magazine. It had been explored, setting and story wise. So it like Dragonlance. It was another thing that kind of it existed, and then they tried this new thing with it, this new kind of product with it.
I, we've been talking about Dragon a little bit, and it's important to also bring up Dungeon. Can you think of any time in history where you had, like in RPG history, where you had a better value for money than Dungeon Magazine? I mean, Dragon Magazine too, especially when Dragon used to release with a complete adventure in it or a complete like little mini game or something. But oh my God, it was like something like 295, 395 back when that was actually even fairly inexpensive for a magazine, and you'd get like 80 pages of adventures. Hi, Julia. Um,
Got Darren Drader and Julia Martin and Kerry Andrew have all joined the chat. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining.
but
Yeah, no, but the other
good God,
thing, just kind of as on a less. I know I don't want to go negative, but one of the challenges we had when we got to Wizards was that some of the people there looked at the value that Dungeon in particular was giving, and assess it. It was too good. We should not do that anymore. We are giving people too much of a bargain.
Yeah. Well, our
Look
audience,
on Bill's face. He's remembering those meetings right now.
our audience didn't even know it.
Well, but there was the thing, right? The thing, the weird thing about Dungeon was it gave you 100 and some odd pages, 3 or 4 adventures, and no one played through all of them, right? Maybe you only played through one, but you stole from it. It had all kinds of things you could use in there.
I just
Like
ran
the
into
first
somebody
thing
the
I
other
sold
day.
to TSR was a dungeon adventure.
I remember running into somebody the other day who told me that they played the Birthright adventure I wrote when Birthright was coming out, for
Right.
Dungeon. I I thought that was funny. I mean, just the other day, and I mean they just ran it. I didn't mean they ran it back then. I mean they
Right.
ran it
Yeah.
a month ago.
And
Um,
that goes back to the what we were talking about before, at what you were saying about your experience with first edition, and it's true about all of it. Is the business secret that the managers don't ever want to think about is that the fact of the matter is there's enough out there that no one ever really has to buy more than the game and what they need to start ever.
mm,
But they want to, and that's the good part. That's why there's but business wise, I think that ignoring that truth is where a lot of times the company gets in trouble.
you want to hear a funny retail thing?
Yes,
Um,
yes,
when I was working at Fat Cat Books, which you may or may not have been aware of, that's a joke. Um, so when I was working there, one of the things that Brian had going, he of course taught this Brian Perry, the guy who owned Fat Cat Books and in Johnson City. He he had a philosophy that I thought was really great. He wanted to give you an opportunity to spend all of your money in his store, and that sounds
yeah,
greedy or bad or whatever. That's not what he meant. The thing was, he knew that everybody who came into the store had a different amount of money. He also knew that you didn't go to a store to not spend money. I mean, yes, there are times when you just want to go window shopping. But for the most part, if you go to a store, you're disappointed if you actually don't spend any money. So one of the things he started doing way back in the early days of D&D was figuring out ways to appeal to every price point. I don't know if you remember, but back in the first edition days, the only way you could buy miniatures was in those boxes. Ralph Partha,
yeah,
Grenadier had these boxes, and you get like 6 or 8 or 12 miniatures or something. And that was where they'd stick in the ochre jelly or whatever, which was just a blob of lead, that probably was a mistake. And somebody said, we can sell that. But one of the things that Brian would do is he would break up those miniature box sets. He'd break up the dice sets and he would put them in like little fishing lure, the things you sold fishing lures out of, and he'd mark them at different prices. So, you don't want or can't afford to buy the whole box of minis, but you can spend $1 to get that Paladin mini that you wanted, or you can get an extra
Brian's
D20
a pretty smart
for
guy.
20 cents or something. Yeah. And it was great. So, yeah, every time you went, you're like, I've got $15 to spend. Oh, I can't buy this big box set, but I can buy this, that, and the other thing. And, that's one of the things I really hope that Wizards sort of gets back to in a way, because I've heard that they're getting rid of their like microtransactions or whatever. But I think it's a great idea to be able to, spend the amount of money you want so you can get, the elements you can afford or that you want and not have to necessarily say, oh, I got to commit $75 or whatever. It's like, sorry, just going off.
Yeah, well, we're certainly not going to solve the current Wizards business
No,
model.
no,
All right,
I just,
here's a thing I'd like to do because it's my show and I like to feature me because that's the kind of guy I am. So we've done 25 years. I've done 25, actually, I think 26 different drawings. And I want to just kind of go through them. This is going to be one product a year. And then after after doing that, I want to look at the first 25 years and say, what would you, in your head, how do you break that up into phases or eras, or where did things change? These may not be the products that triggered it, but I think that it's going to get us in the mindset of thinking of this 25 years as a span. Right? So if I come over here, I'm going to switch it over, and we're still on the screen. And there is the very first one I did was for the white box set. I did it in black and white too, but it didn't look nearly as good. I colored it up. And so that was 1974.
That horse looks terrified.
The horse, it did. There's a lot about that one. The art, I mean, one of the big switches is the I'm not going to even say a good bad quality, but the style quality of the art. There are a couple of big shifts that happen over this time. Next, there was the Greyhawk Lizard Man from inside the Greyhawk World of Greyhawk digest size book, and then everyone forgot about the Swords and Spells book. It had no, I don't know anyone that used it, but that cover was really interesting, so I decided to draw that one. And then we got out of that and into the first box set. It was the first basic box set.
This is one of the first products I owned.
This is the first full
Me
product.
too. I can't remember if I had this or the Monster Manual or whatever came out first, but I think we must have started with this box.
Yeah, this was the same year as the Monster Manual.
So for me, the experience for this was I had heard about D&D through unusual channels. I think my sister, who was very into fantasy, had told me this thing exists. And I remember getting this and being like, how the hell is this a game? And reading the rules, and a friend of mine saw me reading the rules. He wasn't actually that much of a friend at the time. We just knew each other. And he's like, "Oh, do you play D&D?" And I was like, "Well, I'm trying to learn." And he goes, "Well, I know how to play D&D. I'll come over and play." I wrote a whole article about it, everything in Dragon, because I want to get paid for everything I do. But it was interesting. I think this was sort of a turning point where, well, certainly for me, obviously, because I got into the game, but also TSR sort of saying, "Hey, this is something bigger than just this little hobby. This is something where we can."
I mean, it certainly was in that this is marked where they went out of just being in weird hobby stores to being available in mass market bookstores.
Yeah. Well, and KB Hobbies.
Yeah.
Do you remember KB Toys?
Yes.
And
I found this, or I found the first product at Polk's Hobby, which was right near the Complete Strategist, which I didn't find yet in Manhattan. We were there buying a little army man because we were making a war game to play in my gaming group, and I found this weird Dungeons and Dragons thing, and because I was the person who always figured out all the roles, I became the dungeon master, and
yeah. Michael, yes, this is the box where the blue book was in. This was the cover.
The one that had
full cover.
From my copy had the counters as opposed to the dice.
Yeah. So then the next year, I'd drawn the player's handbook cover multiple times before. So rather than do that, I went for an interior piece and did the.
I wish you could show my painted miniature of the player's handbook.
And then the DMG.
That was my first hardcover book that I owned.
Yeah.
Yeah. I lived in a small town in northeastern Pennsylvania. You got what you got, and we actually played using just the basic set, some of the little books, and the DMG. Because remember, the DMG at the very end had the experience points tables, which actually had all the stats for the monsters. No pictures, no descriptions, no. Well, I don't remember if sizes were included or not, but we created dungeons, and it's like, what's a Neo
Size
Audio? I
didn't
don't
matter
know.
back then. Dragons fit
Yeah,
in 10-foot rooms.
Everything
yeah.
fits in a 10-foot room.
It sounds cool, and it's got this neat ability. So Neo Audio, it is for the win. It's like,
We know its numbers. We can fight it.
yeah.
All right. So then went on to Expedition of the Barrier Peaks, which again, I think that falls into what you were talking about earlier, Bill, in that although it seems like there's a story in this, it's not. This is just a place adventure with weird stuff that happens. Yeah, you could add story to it. You could. It was rife. It begged you to add story to it, but
There was a little.
The early adventures were encounters strung together. That's really what they were.
This was hold it back on that was an interesting one though, because remember this one also had color inside. It had that art book, and some of the art was color. Remember, you had the thing where you're supposed to show the players this, and there were a few pictures in there that were actually color. But yeah,
I don't remember that, but I'm not going to say it's not so.
I can run upstairs.
I don't know.
Maybe I'm crazy, but I do remember it had a hell of a lot of art, because so much of it was dependent upon, don't tell the players what this is, just show it to them. And they deliberately made it so that like some of the weapons and everything didn't look like weapons, because you had that crazy table you had to roll on.
Bill, you look like you were about to say something.
I was going to say a couple of the adventures in this period had those art
Yeah.
books or flip books. Yep.
Um,
During this time, this was an adventure in the S series, the special series that had weird stuff. White Plume Mountain was one of them. But one of the things that was interesting, you didn't do a cover for it, I don't think. Do you remember the competition adventures? C1, 2, 3, things like that.
Yeah.
The reason I mention those is they were the things, they and Dragon Magazine, I don't remember which was first, but they were the ones that told me about conventions. Because again, growing up northeastern Pennsylvania, we didn't have anything like a gaming convention. But I found out about conventions and Gen Con and things like that through stuff like that. That was when I realized that this hobby I was playing was a hobby. It wasn't like any other game. I mean, I'd never heard of like, I don't know, a Monopoly convention, other than, going to Wall Street or whatever. But the idea that there was a community that played these games, I mean, you got some of that through Dragon and everything, but the idea that we would fantasize about going to these conventions, we never even considered actually doing it. It probably would have been a hell of a lot easier than I thought.
Ed, were you the one that told me about you and your group going through, because in Dragon they used to publish the schedule for what was going to happen at Gen Con.
And we would sit there and we'd go through and we'd highlight stuff and go, if we were at Gen Con, we'd play this and we'd sign up for that. And when the competition adventures came out, we actually played them according to the rules. We ranked ourselves. I actually had I had a main gaming group, but then there were these other people I knew of who played. And when the competition adventures came out, I think Hidden Shrine of Tomokaen was the first one I did this with. I ran it for my game group, and then I ran it for this other game group and scored it so they could see how they did. And they got together and talked about like, oh yeah, we did this thing and we did that thing. And, oh, you got to that room. Oh, we didn't even see that room, things like that. It was really fun. And it was almost like our own little mini convention. I mean, it wasn't really, but you know what I mean?
No. And in fact, for those watching, we talked about this in my conversation with Harold Johnson and my conversation with Scott Douglas. We're talking about the RPGA and how in the early years there was that ranking. It wasn't just play it. You literally ranked at the end. You scored how everyone did, and there could be a winner in D&D. All right. So next we went
Hold on,
on.
I want to ask Bill. Bill, did you run any of the competition adventures for your group as actual competition adventures? Did you score them or anything?
No, scoring was silly. We I ran them as I always played it as a campaign, even though before I knew what that was. So
Right.
my characters
Mhm.
advanced the stories. I connected
Oh,
them
we
one to
definitely
another
did that. Yeah.
to make it like a long story. And I
Yeah.
used whatever adventures were available that I could find because they were. I lived in New York City and they were still hard to find in the early days. Um, and then you wanted to make sure that, well, it says it's for 20th level. We're fifth. I'll just make it work, right? And that's the way we did
Yeah.
it.
We actually ended up running the Drow adventures before the Giants adventures because I got the Drow ones and I didn't have the Giant ones.
All right. Let's
Sorry,
roll.
Stan. Go
No,
ahead.
that's all right. You know what? This is about having the conversation. We've got what if we're having
We're
fun
losing
talking.
people. We're
Of course,
losing people.
people, you're not going to get your 1,000. All right. So
So
now, um, Fiend Folio, of course, is next. God, I love this cover just because of the shades of blue it used. But
I, I also like the art in the Fiend Folio. It was a little different
yeah,
than art in the other books at the time. Uh, Obviously, it was the Games Workshop guys, or what became Games
yeah.
Workshop guys. Um,
TSR or TSR UK.
yeah, but I liked the stippling in the black and white art and that kind
Yeah.
of stuff.
and I wasn't actually a huge fan of the art, but I really did like the book and I liked the monsters. And I didn't hate the art, but it tells you
Well, I was
I
in art
like
school at the time, Ed, so I'm
yeah,
telling you
yeah,
it was good art.
right. Well, you guys are artists and I'm not, so but no, I like the cleaner art in the original, but I did like a lot of the stuff because a couple of things I liked about it was there were some really far out things, and there were other ones that delved into a lot of the interesting mythology I had read as a kid because I didn't have a lot of opportunities to read a lot of science fiction and fantasy, except when I could, get a ride to the nearest big bookstore or whatever. So I used what was in the library, and that meant I read lots of mythology, and I could find lots of mythology, and it was really cool to run into the Penalagon and all these other things that were part of ancient like Gaelic myths or whatever that like I knew, and I was like, hey, cool, somebody else knows this stuff, And, it's not just Greeks and Vikings.
All right, then yeah, this is the weird outlier of all the things I did because I wanted to do one that tied into those story ads that were done in that ran in Marvel Comics.
Mm-hmm. The Black Pudding.
Yeah, but they were Ravenloft, which is a turning point in so many different ways. Um,
I have
but
run this adventure in almost every game system I've ever played. I've converted it to use in Torg, Alternity, Star Wars, D&D, and I've run it for a lot of different groups over the years. It just impressed me so much because it was so different at the time. Because, like I said, this is the first place where I actually felt a story was part of the adventure.
So I ran Expedition to the Barrier Peaks in many, many different
yeah,
game systems.
yeah,
I've never actually run or played the original Ravenloft.
really,
Yeah,
huh,
just never had the opportunity.
You
fascinating.
It was
never were in one of my sessions of it, really?
no. I played the. Now Greg, remember, a friend of ours, ran the new fifth edition Ravenloft thing. I played that, but no, I never played the.
Hmm.
I always wanted to kind of play the original adventure because everybody always talked about how much fun it was and everything. But this was at the time where I was playing everything but D&D in a lot of ways, and all the D&D I played was homebrew stuff. We had our own campaign setting. We were building our world. I mean, I had binders full of stuff that we had created. So we actually weren't using very many published adventures at this point. But I always kind of was like, boy, I wish I'd gotten a chance to play that when it was new.
Yeah. One of the other ways at Ravenloft, I mean, we talk so much about the content of the adventure itself, but in looking through these, the map, the 3D map,
the isometric map,
isometric map, yes. But in looking at my homages here, I just realized that this, if I don't know, because I did the cartoon the year before, it's hard to say for sure. But this is right around the era the qualitative work that went into the covers changed from drawings that were colored or painted over cartoony drawings, switched to painters. To
This is around the time when I think they began to hire the actual art staff, isn't it? Yeah.
Wasn't this about the time? Was this about the time they started coming out with the gold box games too, the SSI computer games? Those were like 80,
probably
89, something like that.
This is 83. So this is before the gold box.
This is still a few years before that.
Yeah.
Then snuck off into novel land for the first of the Dragonlance covers.
That was one of the tricky ones for me too. Is by the time TSR novel line launched, I'd been reading a lot of science fiction and fantasy for decades, and I could not get into the original early D&D novels, Dragonlance stuff.
I loved the Dragonlance novels when they came out. It was the D&D game made to life, and I was a big fan. Same with Bob's stuff, the Crystal Shard. I liked the. Later, I tried to read the originals again, and they didn't quite hold up. But that's taste and opinion.
It's just those are something I wish they had come out when I was a little younger or something. Because I think I could have liked them. Because there's a lot of stuff in my reading history that I read when I was younger that I really loved at the time and everything, and I just felt I never gave them enough of a chance in a way, There's Zeb.
And now we get
talk about turning points though, Stan. TSR's novels dropped on the industry like a bomb in a good way, right? They were
a good way, good bomb.
Yes, a good bomb. They were hitting bestseller lists that everyone else that was publishing couldn't stand them, right?
Oh my God, Locust Magazine kept snubbing them, and it was so terrible. I mean, even being at West End later, and we were we weren't in competition with DSR, but we felt like we were. But you're still like, my God, these people are just getting railroaded. Their stuff is flying off the shelves, and they can't buy attention. Back up a little bit. You just flip through a bunch of stuff. I mean,
hold on a second. I was going to say that if people that are watching want to hear more about that, James Louder, and I had a long conversation about the book department and that era with Locust and what was happening and how it was being reported or not reported to the broader audience. So go look that episode up. So I skipped one. Right? We went over this. We saw this one, and then there was Queen of the Spiders, which was, and I talked about this while we were working on it in the free newsletter, everyone. There's a free newsletter where I was talking about um, the controversial nature of this drawing, of this painting, and the other ones that wasn't Clyde. It was who did this. Um, but between anyway, I'm blanking on his name now. Um, he did that
Was it
cover.
Dave Sutherland?
No. It was a guy who passed away back in the early aughts. Who was working on EverQuest.
Oh, Dave Sutherland did the original cover art.
Yeah, but the Drow are clearly African American women here. Um, would either of you argue with that about that? No, no. But
No. I'm sorry. I'm actually looking at the original art because I'm looking at your illustration, but I mean, you did a pretty faithful thing. Yeah, that was
yeah,
definitely that artwork. Definitely depicted Drow as
Yeah,
looking like
Darren and
African.
Jeff both pointed out that it was Parkinson.
it was Parkinson. Parkinson, yes, Keith Parkinson. God,
Okay.
I'm sorry to the memory of Keith that I could not pull his name up there.
Yeah.
But Jeff Grubb and Steve Winter and I were having a conversation about this, and the people that were in house at the time didn't see it that way. This was an interpretation of Drow, and it was because there wasn't a set color or that was the intention was that these are Drow. These are dark elves, not African American humans. Um, but the rest of the world didn't see it that way. And clearly, you go back and look at the paintings now, and I don't think anyone would interpret it any other way than that. But yeah. So in this painting, in this homage, I was true to what Parkinson did in the painting. The next one also had a character like that I reinterpreted more to the modern interpretation of a Drow. Because if you go back and look at the original painting for the Waterdeep in the North, that character there holding the stake is, I don't know if it's exactly one of the same models, but it's the same Drow interpretation. So things change over time.
Weird looking to be older.
And we had World of Greyhawk. Greyhawk was starting to become more than just a set of place names. And then we start getting into more. This is the era you were talking about. Maybe it was before we went on, but the era when making new campaign settings is what TSR did. Every year there was a new one. And Spelljammer.
Spelljammer? Yeah.
Yep. Spelljammer was an attempt to do something that was different than everything else.
Which is funny because a few years prior they had done Star Frontiers, which was like to compete with Traveller and get Star Wars stuff and everything.
And then we had Legends and Lore.
Yeah, I mean, Legends and Lore, wasn't that basically a
That was the
skinning
updated
of
deities
It
and
was an
demigods
updated, yeah, it was, but it was also
without the Cthulhu mythos
or the Melnobean mythos.
or Nuon.
Yeah,
Or did it have Nuon in it? Because we did have the license to Lankmar at the time.
remember that it had Nuon in it, but yeah, I'd tell you. Well, it's a different story. I'll tell you later. Then we got to Dark Sun.
Bill had a little something to do with that.
Yeah, I thought Dark Sun, I loved Brahms' art. I got galleys of that because I got to do one of the first products as a freelancer. I did an adventure and the Slave Tribe source book. So I got to see the galleys before the box came out, and it had all the art in it, and it was pretty cool. I
So
thought they did a good job with it.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is true or not, but looking back, wasn't Dark Sun kind of the first of the uh, how am I going to put this? Really lavish campaign settings. I don't mean the setting itself. I mean the product. I mean, didn't that come like with like a special cloth map or something or whatever? I mean,
That was the
good
second box
way
set.
up in,
Yeah, it
at this
wasn't a
time.
cloth map in the first one, but it did have
Oh,
the
okay.
adventures were done in the with the flip book style.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So cost of goods started to creep way up.
You have a Ravenloft product.
It was also one of the first. It was an era when the settings decided, well, you really don't need the core books to play. Everything will be in your box. So we stopped selling you the core books, which was another interesting business decision.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you still needed the three, but the player's handbook and the DM.
No, because these characters were not in the player's handbook. This gave you new
The character
rules
classes.
and tells you the equipment that you had doesn't you didn't need it because there's no metal equipment.
Yeah, but you
A
still
lot
You
of the
had to use
spells
all the
didn't work.
stuff that was in the box set.
you still needed the spells.
Some of them.
You're right. It went beyond
It
that.
made large chunks of the core books
It was one of those things
unusable
I
for
was
this
talking
setting.
about earlier, where people stopped identifying themselves as D&D players and started identifying themselves as, oh, I'm a Dark Sun player, I'm a Forgotten Realms player.
Yeah.
They stopped just being D&D players.
Well, yes. I mean, so much of that is also there was a product a month for each of the things, and who could afford to be a fan of everything?
Yeah.
All right. Speaking of, here's a Ravenloft product comes creeping in, Forbidden Lore. Which I always, you know what, there's a lot about the style of Ravenloft I like, but it also, uh, except for the fact that occasionally, like this one, there'd be someone with a sword. Ravenloft products so rarely could you look at the picture and say, "Yeah, that's a D&D. I'm going to be playing D&D."
Ravenloft was tough too, because I always felt that Ravenloft worked best as an adventure or a short campaign, often because I mean, one of the big characteristics of Ravenloft was the mists. You're out adventuring in your whatever world, and suddenly the mists roll in, and now you're in a whole new place, and there's supposed to be all this fear and this, we're not, we were heroes in our other setting. Now we're just trying to survive. And I always felt that the Ravenloft campaign setting, by being like set in Ravenloft, that was kind of a challenge.
It was challenging. I mean, it's weird in that, as you say. I'm sorry, I jumped in before you had a chance, Bill. Do you have any
No.
thoughts?
I was just going to say that personally, from my standpoint, I was a fan of the settings that were different. I liked Ravenloft. I liked Planescape. I liked Dark Sun. There's a place for Forgotten Realms and Greyhawk and Dragonlance, but to me, they were very similar, and I liked the ones that took us in a different direction.
Oh, I like those elements. I just felt specifically Ravenloft actually kind of worked better as something you would go into and then like maybe get out of.
It took
No, I
long
think that if you're
time.
going to do a campaign setting, make it different. Make it interesting. Yes.
I mean, the thing for Ravenloft is it was the kind of meta campaign setting, and that people from all the other settings came there.
Yeah.
And it took a while before TSR ever did a product which had you could play a character who comes from Ravenloft.
I remember I used to peripherally work on a lot of Ravenloft stuff because I would work with Cindy Rice,
Yeah.
who did a lot of the development of a lot of the stuff in there. I would sit in her office and we would work on Ravenloft product together. And I still remember one very funny playtest where I was playing a red steel pirate, and for some bizarre reason, on the character, this is a legit published character. We basically just grabbed characters from different settings, and the pirate had a cannon as part of their equipment. But I still remember I'm playing the pirate and I'm doing the whole "arr matey" thing, just hamming it up. It's a play test, but we're still having fun with it. And I'm a fighter, or whatever. And we run into this old hag, and she starts gibbering at us, and nobody can speak the language because we're not from there. And I go, "Arr, I cast tongues," and before I can tell Cindy I was joking, she starts saying, "Oh, okay, well, this is what the old hag says." And it just kind of breaks the adventure. And it's like, oh, and then later I tried to fire my cannon. She's like, "You've got a what?" It's like, "I've been dragging this cannon around." Sorry, just weird little thought. I found it amusing.
Yeah, the Book of
Heavy metal.
The what?
Book of Artifacts.
That's the Lochnar.
And back into FR for Book of Lairs, the title that was used 4 times across at least 3 different campaign groupings. Glantry, which was Mystara.
Yeah, I remember that.
I had looking at what I was doing.
So, Mystara was kind of an interesting, weird thing too. Mystara, which we still supported, was supporting basic D&D.
Right. Well, I think Mystara was the world that, if I remember, and I was not working on it at the time, but having talked to people, my recollection of what I was told was that the setting was what they used for basic D&D, and then they made it Mystara when they brought it over to AD&D. They made that mark of Mystara. That
Okay.
Didn't these also have the CDs in them?
this box did.
Cost of goods.
And then Planescape, right? We had Hellbound, another big meta campaign. Birthright.
Yay!
It's funny. You sent me a text sometime saying, "When are you going to do Birthright cover something?" Working on that next.
What a great adventure.
You wrote that adventure.
Yes.
Yes, you did.
No, I enjoyed it. I mean, to be honest, this was in a lot of ways my homage to Tolkien and stuff like that. And one of the challenges for Birthright that was really kind of interesting was everybody is supposed to be playing a regent, that is a king or similar sort of thing. And a lot of people who wrote for Birthright seem to kind of ignore that. They just ran a regular D&D adventure, and it's like, I kept thinking about things like the Arthurian legends. I mean, a lot of people don't remember most of the Knights of the Round Table were kings in their own right. I mean, Sir Lancelot was a king in France, came over to be part of the Round Table and everything. And so I tried to write adventures when I did them. Like my first one was Legends of the Hero Kings, and it's all a bunch of adventures that are supposed to emulate the actions that kings and regents and stuff take. This one was another one where I had to try and write it so that it made sense that not just a hero, but the king, the regent, goes out to solve this problem. And, that's why it was King of the Giant Downs. Sorry, just rambling.
No, sorry. I mean, that's, you know what, kind of break for a second. One of the things I'm thinking about doing after I finish the 50 years is to put together some shows to bring together in group settings like this, people who are on the team. So I'm thinking about doing a Birthright team show sometime next year. provided that you and other people on the team would be interested to talk about that, because what you were just saying would be a fun conversation to spend 20 minutes kind of talking about how that was and maybe why that was a challenge and what people didn't get. But we're not going to do that right now. Demonstrator says, "Oh, those CDs were terrible." they kind of were. All right, and then we had one of Bruce Cordell's early products. It was an adventure for the start of a trilogy of Illithid themed adventures. It was called A Darkness Gathering. And this is one of my favorite covers. Uh, at the time, there were fewer and fewer covers that seemed to be about adventuring. Birthright being a notable exception to that rule, because most of the Birthright adventure covers did do that.
Yeah. Well, we kind of made sure. We yelled at them until they got
And then we get to 99, which was the remake of Council of Worms. And I almost did the earlier box set too, but there was another cover that year.
So we did this. Basically, 99, I was trying to figure out what do we put out in the last year of second edition. And I just thought this was a good time to get this product back into some kind of print. I think the box set's better because it's got the nice handouts and things. But I think this came out well for a book version of the product.
Yeah.
And I had a lot of fun working on the original Council of Worms. That was one of the first projects I got assigned after I joined the staff at TSR.
Mm-hmm.
And in those days, Bruce Hurd would put up a list of products, and we'd like fight in the arena to get them. And somehow I won out on the adventure where you get to play dragons, and that's all they told me. So everything else I made up. So.
It's really interesting. You were mentioning this coming out, or the new version of this coming out at the end of second edition. Kind of that was such an interesting time, because at the time, Bill of course was in charge of the whole department. I was the creative director for D&D, and I had to manage two halves of the same team. We had the one part of the team that was doing all second edition stuff, and the other part of the team that was doing third edition development. And I kind of had to work with both of them and keep them both sort of separate in a way, because while we did strategically place third edition stuff in some second edition product, we didn't want to do it accidentally. And it was kind of a interesting situation. And one of the things we really leaned hard into at the end of second edition were products we felt customers, players wouldn't look at and say, "Oh, when third edition comes out, this is going to be useless." So Council of Worms is a terrific example of that, because it's about playing a dragon and everything, and third edition wasn't going to be about playing a dragon. That was also
Michael. Interestingly, Michael asked, "Was it weird working on stuff while leading up to 3E was happening?" The lead up to 3E was happening.
Yeah, it was.
It was an interesting period. I mean, we were talking about this before we got on the air. I was initially charged with figuring out what was wrong with the business and how to fix it. So there was a lot of discussions. I mean, I had leads reporting to me that each championed one of the different settings, and nobody wanted to give up their setting. But I knew we had to. So it was a very, very interesting period of going through our product list and figuring out what was working, what wasn't working, and what do we do next. And then once we decided we were doing third edition, that had its own schedule, as Ed was mentioning. That initially Thomas was overseeing it, and then later Ed took it over, if I remember the way that worked out. And but
Yeah, he
meanwhile,
left
we also
about the
had to fill
time.
in the year before that with other product, and we tried to do things that would make sense, like we did the End of the World adventure, we
The
did
Apocalypse Stone. Yeah.
Apocalypse
Mhm.
Stone, we did Council of Worms. I think we did a
Reverse
Vecna
dungeon.
adventure. Yeah, so we tried to do stuff that would not be useless in the year, but would also lead us toward what was happening with third edition.
Yeah. Um,
One of the things we also had to do was slowly reveal third edition to the team, because initially there was a lot of resistance to the drastic changes that were being made in third edition. I mean, Bill can tell you better than I can. The original draft for third edition was like second edition 0.5. It was not radical changes, and that's not what Peter wanted. And things got shaken up pretty heavily. And so we also knew that third edition had to be developed not exactly in a vacuum, but we had needed people to pay attention to doing the second edition product that was, you know, supplying the money. But then at a certain point, we had to do a changeover. We had to win over the rest of the team so that they could then go on and play and develop things for third edition, because the small third edition team couldn't do all the products, and we didn't want them to do all the products. We wanted everybody else to be a part of the team, to be doing stuff. And
well, I
then of
mean,
course, like,
it
Realms had come out and everything.
it had to be, because other than Forgotten Realms, there weren't going to be other worlds. Not to start with, everyone was going to be doing core D&D.
Yeah. And I mean, I can still remember one of our biggest efforts was, well before anybody outside the company. And I still think it's amazing that we kept the secret for as long as we did. We had basically a play day where the third edition rules were in one thing we printed in our print shop. Everybody got a copy. And we went up to the Wizards of the Coast Game Center, and we spent a day with the third edition team running the game for the rest of the team, so that they could get exposed to it and answering questions and talking about it. And we had seminars, and people got to chime in about what they didn't like and what they did like. And, the changes were made based on that. I mean, at that time, that was a rules document. It wasn't a player's handbook. It wasn't a DMG. It wasn't a Monster Manual. It was just a thing. I really wish I had kept that. That would have been really fun to have. But I
I
did
sold
not
mine.
too.
Bill, you look like you were about to say something there.
Um, there's so much to say, but I'm not sure how to say some of it. Yeah, I mean, third edition was an interesting process. Obviously, as Julia mentions in the chat, Peter, owner of WotC at the time, he had goals and ideas that he really wanted us to deal with, right? And that set some of the direction. So I had to work within that to also get out the product that I thought we needed to do. Um, but it was an interesting time that turned out the product we actually needed at the time, even though it was probably more complex a game than I would have done if I had my complete druthers.
Oh yeah. Well, in a way, it almost had to be in a way. One of the things I always
It
think
was
about with,
certainly it was a response to where second edition had gotten to
yeah,
in a lot
yeah,
of ways.
we kept writing new rules for second edition. There were
Well,
like
yeah,
four
every
different.
designer had a different rule for swimming in their adventure, right? So,
Yeah, and I often think about third edition as this big leap. We took a big leap of faith, a big leap forward, big leap sideways, whatever you want to call it. Um, and then whenever you take a big leap, sometimes you don't land exactly right, which is why one of the reasons we ended up doing 3.5 just a few years later to just sort of clean up some of the stuff. Yeah, there's all kinds of
That's a
there's
that's a discussion
answers.
that's going to happen in a few weeks again. We're going to be looking at that a little more in depth. Um,
Yeah,
there's a big story to go along with what happened at 3.5, but we got to. Right now, we're on the verge of 3.0.
Sure.
yeah,
Um,
And um, and on that verge, I mean, I was working a lot with the art team, Todd Lockwood and Sam Wood, on the look, and we wanted to make sure that you know the art reflected that you were carrying around 100,000 things on your back. We wanted you to look cool, but still be more or less dressed. Um, some people hate this, but I made us put boots on the halflings because they don't want to go in the dungeon without boots on. Um, and we
we
kind of
did a
took a
nice.
Western, like a cowboy Western approach to the art. And I thought that was really cool. And I thought it gave third edition a really nice
yeah,
uh,
but
baseline of what we
I,
were imagining.
I was
I
going to
also
say
like.
again. Sorry, let me just jump in for a second, Ted. That that is another thing. People who are watching now, I had a good long conversation with Todd Lockwood about on his episode. He and Sam Wood led the execution of creating a visual Bible for third edition at the same time the game was being the, uh, written from a mechanical and play style aspect. So
Yeah, and I spent a lot of time in there because, well, frankly, there were too many cooks in the mechanical end of the game at the time. And I kept an eye on it, but I didn't get super involved because, we had Jonathan, we had Monty, we had Skip, we had Peter, we had Ed. There was way too many people already working in there. So,
Yeah, I ended up trying to become sort of a conduit for the design team to everyone else, including occasionally uh, putting my life on the line and arguing with Peter over things. Uh, One of the things I remember that I really liked, and I honestly don't remember whose idea this was, but we decided one of the things we wanted to do was make a good pass at uh, making the default pronoun for D&D not he. And one of the passes we did, now back then we weren't really using they as a singular pronoun in there. So one of the things we chose to do was mix up the genders for the different character classes. And whenever we would do an example in the game, we would use one of the iconic characters. And of course, we split them 50-50 down the road. So, like, anytime you talked about a wizard, you were by default talking about Miley the wizard, who happened to be female. If you're talking about a sorcerer, it was Hennet, the male sorcerer. Krusk, who was my playtest character, the half orc barbarian. Um, things like that, who was male. And we stuck to that religiously. Our editorial team made us. They did a great job. Kim Mohan, Julia, Michelle Carter, a whole team of
yep,
people who came on and worked their heads off, because one of the other things that was tough, and this is one of the battles I kept losing to Peter, is we had to deliver these books on time. Original Player's Handbook was supposed to be 224 pages. Original DMG 224. Original Monster Manual 224. Only one that was 224 was the Monster Manual, and that was after we abandoned the idea of having a page break. We basically just ran it straight like the old first edition Monster Manual. They kept adding pages, and in fact, the Player's Handbook would have been even larger, except I came up with the idea of shrinking the type size for the spell section. But it was terrible on the editorial team, because they had to, yeah, take a look at the difference. They had to work under the same amount of time, uh, but we're doing huge amounts of heavy lifting at the end there. But no, I coming back to it, I always
But
love
we
the
got them
fact.
out on time. That was,
Yep,
you know,
yep,
that
yeah,
was
we
just
did.
one of the things I did keep my eye on was the
Yep.
schedule.
I just love the fact that we took that approach, and it's something I've done in my own writing and stuff ever since. I always try and think of a character for the example rather than some sort of generic, you know.
Yes. Yeah, I mean it's an interesting given what has happened in uh, grammatical fields and the rise of the gender neutral they and the singular they. It's very easy for modern uh, younger readers to go back and look at what was done and kind of poo poo it as being very gender rigid. But the fact of the matter is, as you said, Ted, the team was trying to stretch those boundaries and be more inclusive. It was the best
Mm-hmm.
solution that the year 1999 had to offer.
We took steps,
Yeah,
and those steps continued all the way through my tenure, the 14 years that I ran the department. We got better at it as we went along. But we were experimenting too and trying to see, what was right and what would work.
Yeah, and Bill was talking about his work with the artists. He made sure that the artists made sure, the whole team made sure that characters could look cool and interesting, but you didn't have bikini armor, you know,
yeah,
but you did have characters like Miley the wizard and Hennet the sorcerer who didn't wear a lot of clothing for both game mechanic rules and also because let's face it, some people want to play characters who look like that, and good for them. You know, but you want to have it
But
make
even
sense.
then, we kept it within the boundaries of what made some sort of semblance of
Yeah,
sense
yeah.
for what
yeah,
they were doing, right? So,
And one of the interesting things, and again, this is people who want to hear more about this. Todd Lockwood and I talked about it a lot. Is uh, my perspective as someone not working on the game but a fan was that D&D is going to be reinterpreted for your home anyway. I always wanted to see multiple views of different interpretations of it in the core books to drive that home. From a business perspective, that wasn't the smart thing to do, and this developing a clean set of this is what D&D looks like, as opposed to generic fantasy of any stripe. Like this is clearly D&D. The third edition is the first time that had been done.
with the
yeah.
exception
Well,
of some of the campaign settings, Dark Sun has a particular
Yes,
look.
no. Yeah, no. The different campaign settings definitely had their, but they
yeah,
all had their own. You could say you were playing D&D and be playing any of those. This was the core book. Just kind of, it had become generic fantasy, or generic fantasy had become it. Really is a. Again, I'm trying to remember what I've said already and what I haven't, but uh, D&D was producing in the 80s. D&D was producing art and laying and expanding, putting out more fantasy art than uh, to a broader audience than most other situations, and rightfully so. It influenced it, and so generic fantasy began to look like D&D, and in as much as third edition mechanically was a time to reset and stake a claim for this is who we are going forward.
one of the funny things too was third edition was not originally planned to be set in Greyhawk. It was originally supposed to be settingless, and then we realized that it had to have a setting because of clerics, because we had to have deities. I mean,
That was
hey,
a very big discussion. You're right.
I'm
You're,
holding
I'm
it
not saying
down,
you're not right,
It was
but
Greyhawk because Ryan wanted it to be Greyhawk.
yeah.
it was,
But I'm
it was
saying originally it was going to be settingless,
I
and
understand.
then
right.
It's Greyhawk because Ryan wanted it to
yeah,
be Greyhawk.
Yeah,
yeah,
and because that gave for the RPGA, which then was also a business center and had a mission. It needed to have a setting that was the D&D setting that RPGA would have.
Living
All
good.
right. So we're getting kind of close to an hour and a half. Always happens when we chat. I do want to go back to what I was saying earlier. So we took longer than I had expected going through my previous art, but I'm going to pull that big screen up with it again and just kind of look at these. And when you think about this first half of D&D leading up to the break point of the launch of third edition, how would you break this whole era into phases, or would you? When you think about it, where are the um, the breakpoints, the subgroups of styles where the game changed or it represented a certain school of thought, which then morphed into something else?
So I think it's, your early days are experimentation and just growth of the game. It goes from little pamphlets to the hardcover books. Then I think we get, the adventures begin to develop until we see Ravenloft hit, the adventure itself. And then after that, the next break is probably novels and then campaign settings. That's what I would see as the, you know,
That's
and
a
then from the era of the campaign settings till we shuttered in '99 before third edition, it's like a roller coaster,
yeah.
you know, up, 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 and then suddenly the bottom fell out on us, right?
Ed, what do you think about that?
Well, so I mean, I don't really argue with it. I said as we were talking, I do think that the basic set was when I think it went from being a niche hobby to being, oh my God, this is actually something big. Um, and then it's hard for me to actually see some of these. They're very small on my screen.
Right, right.
But I think Bill does point out a bit where, we have the sort of disconnected location based adventures. I do think there was a little bit of a transition within there before actually hitting the novels and stories of the, um, you know, starting to think about your audience as a community rather than just individual groups or individual people. But I don't think it's a point we're necessarily arguing over. I do think that the development of adventure into story and that either leading to or being led by the novels and stuff like that was a big transition point. Um,
Yeah.
Obviously, in addition, just being in there um, was a big thing. It's funny looking at your artwork and the bit you called out as the back of the comic bit. That's another wave of we're trying to get bigger. We're trying to get more mainstream because D&D kind of did have a little bit of a mainstream wave before it actually succeeded at going mainstream. I mean, you had things like ads appearing in comic books. You had the D&D cartoon. You had you had, as much as you say, the whole Mothers Against D&D.
Well, the novels themselves were huge.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, even outside of TSR's efforts, you had good and bad recognition of Dungeons and Dragons as a thing. And then it kind of went away for a while. It kind of retreated back into a larger hobby than it was, but it became less of the public consciousness.
We mentioned Vampire earlier. I mean, there was a whole period of time when Vampire was getting bad press, but they were calling it that D&D game, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Oh, here's a funny thing. I got to work into this that sort of ties in. I still remember back when Wizards was promoting the idea of the Wizards store, not owned by Wizards, but rather you could be a premier retailer for Wizards product. And, a lot of that started out, of course, with Magic and everything, but it did become part of it. And I remember talking to our customer service people, and they would call up these stores and they would say, "Hey, what's your most popular role playing game at the store?" And invariably, somebody would be like, "Oh, it's Vampire, or it's Middle Earth role playing, or it's Champions, or some other game." It's like, "Oh, how many Champions basic books did you sell last month?" "Oh, we sold 4 of them." "Oh, okay, well that's good. That's good. How many players handbooks did you sell?" "Oh, I'll have to check. I don't know." "Oh, we sold 14." "Okay, so what's your most popular game at your store?" "Oh, Champions." Uh, do you understand what you're saying? It's like they'd be banging their heads against the wall, going, "You know, D&D is your most popular thing, and you just won't even say it." You know,
Well, it's certainly
right?
no. I mean, that is a conversation that I would love to do a half hour on. Right? It has been uh, the case that D&D has so successfully been the biggest thing that it's discounted. There have been eras where it's been completely discounted, despite being continually the
Yeah.
biggest thing.
And I think there was a big kind of period of that where we were going through that in a way. And basically I didn't really have much to add to Bill's breakdown. I thought his divisions were pretty good, but it was interesting that I think we went from awareness, like everybody knows what D&D is, to people forget about it. It's still going pretty strong during that period, but you weren't seeing it
That's I
popping
mean
up in movies like E or whatever anymore. You're
that's
not.
a PR problem, right? That's like you said. As long as the company was selling it, it really wasn't a problem for the people at the upper echelon of management, right? If the products are selling and they're selling better than anything else, and sales are increasing, well, then it's uh, pride that messes with you. If people say vampire, but the fact of the matter is it's D&D.
Mhm.
That happens a lot with media properties, right? When I got Star Wars, when West End got Star Wars in '86, um, I was working for Marvel at the time. Also, I was doing Marvel Age articles, and I told Jim Sallycrop, "Hey, I can't do this anymore. We just got Star Wars, and I'm going to be working on it." He goes, "Oh, that's a dead license, right?" This was 1997 or 1987, 86. And to Marvel, who was just getting out of the business, Star Wars was dead, but it still had this huge following, right? There's a lot of perception like that. Even today, um, if you just go by the internet, everyone hates all the new Star Wars stuff, but
Oh,
people are
hey,
watching it.
Yeah,
somebody asked,
yeah.
general
Ravenloft
question.
asks the general question: did anybody in the office push to carry Thaco over into third edition? And
Yes.
Ted had talked a bit about that before he went on as something we might talk about.
Bill put together a basically he asked people to write down individually what their sacred cows for D&D was. And I don't know that necessarily people said Thaco. They definitely said armor class -10 to +10. Bill, do you remember any of the other funnier ones that were like, "Oh my God, I can't believe now that people would want to keep that"?
I mean, there was a fan for a lot of, depending on who you were in the department, you had a favorite thing in second edition. Um, but we took that list and actually created a list we were going to follow, and we tried to keep to, the things that we did want D&D to still have in it. And a lot of that necessarily wasn't specific rules, but it was thoughts and feelings and emotions and things like the alignment system. stuff like that.
There's an interesting
But
thing there.
but yes, we had people, old timers, who at least a little bit argued to keep almost all the pieces of second edition.
Yeah.
It's
One
interesting. I
thing,
call first edition the lovable Frankenstein's monster because every time they needed a new rule, they just added it. So you had I had to roll high, I had to roll low, I had to roll sideways in first edition. Second edition was a little more, but it was one of these places where we talked about it earlier. If you didn't like a rule as presented, you created a new one and put it in your next product.
or if
So
you
we
just
had
couldn't find it,
Yeah.
you know.
we just made multiple versions of the rules. It was with third edition where I tried to get in. Let's do a core system and stick to it because that's what I learned at West End Games. So I kind of brought that over to TSR with me. So.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I was thinking one thing. It's kind of funny. The original playtest document that we sent out to playtesters, we took a lot of feedback from playtesters, and things did change. Uh, One of the things that we were stunned by was the original third edition document took out alignment restrictions. Paladins didn't have to be lawful good, monks didn't have to be lawful, and the audience overwhelmingly hated that. And so we put them back in.
Yeah. I said D&D Ditches asks, how is 1994 not Planescape? Looking up here that 94 was, who did I do for 94? Was that just as a brief thing, these are not the products that necessarily represent the that era, though that was one consideration what I chose. Very often it's the cover that I think is a most classic cover that is fun to for me to do an homage to, and I love Planescape, and I wound up doing um, the Blood War, Hellbound, the Blood War, for a couple years later. Now, I didn't love a lot of the Planescape cover art. It's not that it was bad; it's just not evocative, and that's one of the things I was saying about the Bruce Cordell piece. There is how we had gotten away from doing pieces like this on our covers. We were doing what was uh, inarguably really good paintings by really good painters. That, but they were not capturing D&D, the activity that was going on in the games like that. And so, for my homages, I have chosen, in most cases, the cover from that year that feels D&D to me. And that's why D&D Ditches, that's why Planescape was not the book for 94.
Yeah, in general, those artists were great artists, but they didn't really like to do action scenes
Yeah.
as covers. So.
I ran into Don Murin a couple of months ago at a local show. Don Murin was one of the art directors at the time, and only just recently left Wizards the end of last year. She was the last TSR person on staff, and I'm gonna see if I can get her to come on and be a guest. When I came to TSR, I came not only with the West End game design experience, I came with the art background, similar to you, Bill. But I had been working in graphics for West End, so I had a little more cachet with the graphics people at TSR because it was on my resume. But certainly we had some conversations, and their take on what the cover should be like and mine differed wildly sometimes. But I would never, ever say that in a way that made it seem like I thought they were not making good art. And that's not what I would want to have seen on the covers. And Ted, you were saying earlier that for the Birthright, when you got the chance to write your art descriptions, you wrote ones that captured that flavor too.
I was also very fortunate because Tony Sudlow did a lot of those, and
Mm.
Tony liked doing action scenes. But yeah, if you look at the third edition stuff we did later, uh, other than obviously the core books that were meant to look like those cool tomes, most of them, whether they were adventures or not, depicted characters doing actiony things because
For a
we
while.
thought D&D was about action.
I'll tell you something. I'm coming up. I've just you can see here at the top of this drawing here. I'm not quite done with the 2000 drawing that I started last week. But
Make
I've
it bigger.
picked out what I'm going to be drawing for the
Yeah.
next few episodes, and I'll tell you that the early third edition, it was very hard to find products that or not very hard. There was a much slimmer picking for products that I thought this is a classic image. And in fact, 2003 was next to impossible because almost everything we did was either a tome or had that Michelangelo style sketchy drawing. We had almost no product
Yeah.
that had paintings on them.
I remember now. Yeah.
So yeah, it's interesting to see the trends in cover styles.
Mhm.
Anyway,
Yeah, the built cover took over for a while.
yeah, it was, and I love them. Like I love that. Uh, I love that look. I think another show I'd like to do it sometime. Maybe even have a few of them, or have different people on to have this discussion about uh, what your favorite covers are, or in particular, what's your favorite core core book covers, and I just think that would be a fun. Which are the covers? Again, maybe to get this, I have to find a way to phrase what internally I'm doing. What are the covers that say D&D to you?
I like the fourth edition covers. I think Wayne Reynolds'
Wayne Reynolds,
art
right?
is
And I agree that Wayne did great stuff, and some of those fourth edition ones. And this is not at all to knock that off as a consideration. Wayne's done so much more for Pathfinder,
at this point, yes, right.
but yeah,
But at the time, he was the TSR
yep,
artist.
and he
For the
gets
fourth
that.
edition.
He has that. This feels like a D&D adventure feeling, and you're right. The fourth edition books did totally have that. All right,
Uh,
we've been going an hour and a half plus.
I have to feed my cats.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm really thankful
It's
you
way
got.
past my bedtime, Stan.
Uh, you know, you could have stopped talking at any point, both of you. um,
Well, we didn't know how long you were planning on going.
No,
well,
that's fine.
here is me making an effort to find a way to segue you guys out. I really appreciate you coming back and having this conversation. Um, I think that I think it's been a lot of fun, and the people in chat seem to have thought so too. And I hope we can bring you back again to do this again. Yay, cats!
He's been very patient. Um,
Yeah, sure. I've done a
well,
few things
thank you,
between
Stan.
2000 and 2011, so pick a year.
Mhm. I left in 2007, so I can give you outsider stuff at that point. But, hey, for me, sorry, I mean, cover of the first edition AD&D Player's Handbook with the
It's
big
up
eyes.
there. It's way up there.
Yeah.
Like I say, I think that would be an interesting conversation to like kind of send out a not a questionnaire, but a brief. This is what we're going to be talking about. Send me pictures of the 2 or 3 that really mean it to you, and then we can flash them on the screen and talk about them.
Sometime I want to talk about the first edition Rogues Gallery, and I'll tell you why on it
Okay.
later.
Well,
later.
there you go. Out there in YouTube land, leave it in the comments. You want to hear that kind of thing? Let me know. Like, subscribe, click, leave a comment. All right, I'm going to take you guys off screen to do an outro, and then I'll come back and we can say our goodbyes. But thank you very much for coming on.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, there we go. Another good hour and a half with Bill Slavicsek and Ed Stark talking about the first half of the history of D&D. Because here on the show, I've covered that first half. We're about to jump into the second half. We just had up on screen the first one, which is still in work. My homage to the basic set for 3rd edition D&D. Next week, I'm also not going to have drawing, and I'm not going to have guests. I want to just kind of spend an hour or so, just you and me, talking about where the show's at and what we're going to be doing going forward. And like that, it'll be kind of a housekeeping episode. And then in 2 weeks, I'll be back with another guest and more drawings. So thank you all who've joined in here in the first half of the 50 years in the dungeon. And I hope you'll come back. You can, of course, if you haven't seen them, all of the episodes are available on the YouTube channel. In replay, you can watch them. I've had single interviews with Bill and Ed and lots of other people, some of whom got mentioned during our conversation. If you are liking this, I can say that it would be great if you signed up for our free newsletter, which I mentioned earlier, 50yearsinthedungeon.substack.com. You will get information about everything that's coming up. You will be the first people to see the completed cartoon homages when they're done. You'll get it a week or so ahead of anyone else. And if you become a paid subscriber also, there are other nice things you can get, but come in for free. There's enough there. Get you started. Yeah, I was going to pitch some other things for me, but I'm not. Going to leave it right there. One more time. Bring that up there again. Here we go. 50yearsinthedungeon.substack.com. Thank you for joining in. Thank you for joining me for the first, this is episode 29, first almost 30 episodes, and we're going to go forward. There are at least 25 more ahead of us to go before we have covered the breadth of the 50th anniversary of D&D. So till next time, thank you for joining. I'll talk to you later. Bye.